The human mind seeks comfort in symmetry, familiarity, and calm faces, those subtle compositions that convince us that everything is as it should be. When we look upon an old family photograph from 1891, with its faded tones and rigid postures, we see what we expect to see. The father standing firm, the mother composed in her maternal stillness, the children aligned neatly by age and size, their gazes fixed in quiet obedience. It is a scene of structure and unity, a moment captured to immortalize domestic order. Yet within that very order, something else moves, a whisper that unsettles the calm, a presence that does not belong, yet belongs completely. This presence is the shadow concealed beneath the mask of the normal. The sixth figure that lingers faintly at the edge of the image is not merely a spectral curiosity, but a revelation of something deeply human, the repressed truth that every perfection hides. The ordinary, after all, is one of humanity's greatest illusions. It is a surface we construct, a fabric woven tightly enough to conceal the chaos that churns beneath it. Every smile, every composed gesture is a thread in that fabric, a piece of a social tapestry that keeps the unconscious at bay. We call it civilization, but beneath that structure lies a wilderness that has never ceased to breathe. The 1891 family photo embodies this duality, the visible harmony of family life and the invisible tension of what that harmony suppresses. The sixth figure, half seen and half felt, is not an external ghost, but the emergence of what has been long denied by the collective will of the family. It is the secret made visible, the crack in the mirror where the unconscious begins to bleed through. To understand this image deeply, one must imagine the world of that era, a society obsessed with propriety, appearances, and moral virtue. The photograph was not a casual thing, it was a ritual. Each subject stood perfectly still, not only because the exposure required it, but because stillness itself symbolized control. The Victorian mind was one of order and repression. Emotions, passions, and impulses that threatened the facade of respectability were buried beneath layers of etiquette and silence. Every family portrait of that age, therefore, is a document not just of faces but of repression, a snapshot of what society wanted to believe about itself. And so the sixth figure, faintly visible behind or beside the family, becomes the visual metaphor for what that belief system could not contain. It is the unacknowledged emotion, the suppressed history, the secret sorrow that photography, in its unflinching honesty, accidentally revealed. In this way, the uncanny quality of the sixth figure is psychological, not merely supernatural. It confronts us with the realization that even in our most ordinary moments, there are forces within us that operate beyond our control. The human psyche is not a simple landscape. It is layered, complex, filled with contradictions. The conscious mind, the part that poses for the camera, believes in its own stability. It arranges itself neatly for the world to see, choosing the best version of its reflection. But the unconscious, the hidden dimension of being, watches from the shadows. It is the one that refuses to conform, the one that holds our fears, desires, shame, and forgotten memories. That is why the sixth figure disturbs us so profoundly. It is not only because it appears where no one should be, but because it reflects a truth we instinctively recognize, that the things we cannot see still exist, that the things we bury within ourselves never truly die. The unease we feel is not about the ghost in the photograph, but about the ghost in ourselves. The sixth figure is the part of the psyche that refuses erasure. It reminds us that perfection is a performance, and that behind every harmonious scene, there is a story unspoken. The photograph becomes a mirror, not of faces, but of the human condition. Consider how the family, in its apparent unity, represents the collective self. Each member is a fragment of a larger identity, father, mother, child, all functioning as roles within a system of meaning. The photograph, in this sense, is the portrait of a collective consciousness striving for stability. Yet every collective identity casts its own shadow. The family, like the individual, has things it cannot speak of: secrets, transgressions, griefs. Perhaps the sixth figure represents a lost child, a deceased relative, or a forbidden truth that could not be acknowledged in life. But whether literal or symbolic, the meaning is the same. What the family hides returns to the surface. The image, therefore, becomes an unconscious confession, a visual manifestation of something the participants never intended to reveal. There's a deeper irony here. The photograph was meant to preserve memory, to freeze time, to immortalize order. Yet what it captures instead is the instability of that order. Time, even when frozen, continues to move within the psyche. The sixth figure is time made visible, the lingering residue of the past that refuses to stay buried. The more one stares at the photo, the more one senses that the scene is not as calm as it appears. The symmetry begins to tremble. The expressions seem strained, and the sixth figure, half faded, takes on greater meaning. It becomes a rupture in the narrative, the place where the real story hides. It is the silence that holds the truth. This dynamic mirrors the way the mind operates. In our daily lives, we present ourselves through carefully constructed identities. We wear masks, the responsible parent, the obedient child, the respectable citizen, and we believe these masks define us. But beneath them lives another self, wild, instinctual, emotional, and raw. Most of the time, we succeed in keeping it hidden, even from ourselves. Yet every so often, something cracks the mask, a moment of stress, grief, or revelation, and what has been hidden emerges. The sixth figure is that emergence frozen in time. It is the moment when the unconscious self steps into the frame, reminding us that no mask can silence it forever. What makes this especially haunting is that it does not necessarily signify evil or malevolence. The shadow is not always monstrous. It is simply what is unknown, unacknowledged, and unresolved. It becomes frightening only because it is unfamiliar. The family in the photograph may not even have noticed the sixth figure when the image was first developed. Yet its presence changes everything. It reminds us that in every image, and in every human, there are layers unseen by the naked eye. The sixth figure may represent loss, guilt, longing, or simply the presence of what has been forgotten. Its meaning shifts depending on who observes it, because the shadow it reveals is not only theirs, but ours. This concept extends beyond the photograph itself. In a broader sense, the image becomes a metaphor for civilization as a whole. Just as the family constructs its illusion of harmony, so too does society construct its illusion of progress and moral order. Yet beneath every era's confidence lies its own darkness, the injustices, fears, and contradictions it refuses to acknowledge. The 1891 family, in their Sunday best, may symbolize the height of refinement, but behind their calm eyes lurk the social tensions of their age, the rigid class system, gender repression, and the silence surrounding grief and loss. The sixth figure thus becomes not just the shadow of a family, but the shadow of an entire society. It is the collective secret standing quietly at the edge of history. This is why the photograph resonates across time. Even now, more than a century later, it speaks to us, not as a relic of the past, but as a living symbol. The sixth figure reminds us that the human story is not a straight line of progress, but a constant negotiation between light and darkness, between what we show and what we hide. Every generation inherits not only the wisdom of its ancestors, but also their unfinished emotions, their hidden wounds. The past does not vanish, it lingers, waiting for recognition. The sixth figure stands as that recognition, the moment when the unseen demands to be seen. And yet, there is something strangely compassionate in its presence. To see the shadow is to begin to heal. The sixth figure does not merely haunt, it invites awareness. It compels us to look beyond appearances, to question the narratives we accept without thought, to confront the parts of ourselves we would rather not see. It whispers that only by acknowledging the hidden can we truly become whole. The photograph, therefore, transforms from a source of fear into a source of revelation. The very thing that unsettles us becomes the key to understanding. If one looks long enough at that 1891 image, the line between the visible and the invisible begins to blur. The family no longer seems so certain, the boundaries between the living and the unseen no longer so distinct. The photograph becomes a psychological landscape, a map of the human condition where every face, every shadow, every faint outline speaks of the eternal tension between order and chaos, consciousness and mystery. The sixth figure, in this way, becomes a timeless teacher. It reveals that within every moment of stillness, there is movement. Within every illusion of control, there is something waiting to emerge. Within every image of perfection, there is a whisper of truth. The ordinary is never truly ordinary. It is a veil, a performance, a momentary surface stretched across infinite depths. When the sixth figure steps into view, the veil tears just enough for us to glimpse the vastness beyond it, the complexity of human emotion, the persistence of memory, the endurance of what cannot be erased. That faint presence, unnoticed by many, becomes the symbol of all that is hidden within us. And perhaps that is the photograph's greatest gift. It reminds us that the most unsettling truths are often the most necessary ones, that what we fear to see is often what we most need to understand. To look at the unseen is to look at oneself. A photograph, in its silent immobility, does not simply record a moment. It captures an entire psychic landscape. Every shadow, every blurred outline, every strange anomaly is not merely an accident of exposure. It is a dialogue between perception and the unconscious. When we encounter the 1891 family photo, our attention is first drawn to what is clear, to the visible arrangement of human figures framed within a moment of posed composure. But then something else emerges, an additional presence that was not meant to be there, that appears almost incidentally, like an echo caught by the camera's unblinking eye. The sixth figure, faint, spectral, or misplaced, unsettles us because it is not only outside the boundaries of reason, but inside the boundaries of perception. It becomes a reflection of the psyche itself, the unseen that shapes what we see. The mind is not a mirror that simply reflects reality. It is a lens that filters it. What we call reality is already an interpretation, molded by the inner life of the observer. We bring to every image our memories, our fears, our desires, our need for meaning. When something appears that does not conform to these expectations, like the shadowy sixth figure, it is as if the photograph is showing us what we did not know we carried within. The uncanny presence in the image mirrors the unseen dimensions of the mind, the forgotten experiences, the repressed emotions, the fragments of identity that dwell beneath the surface of consciousness. The photograph becomes a stage upon which the visible and invisible aspects of the human being perform together, one under the light, the other beneath it. What we call unseen in the physical sense often corresponds to what is unseen in the psychological sense. The faint outline that eludes the eye symbolizes all that the conscious mind has chosen to ignore. The human psyche, like an old photograph, develops slowly in layers, some parts coming into focus, others fading into the background. What is not seen does not cease to exist. It merely waits for the right light, the right gaze to reveal itself. The sixth figure, whether an illusion or a trace of something real, reminds us of this truth, that the unseen is always waiting beneath the image of order. It is the mirror of the psyche, quietly reflecting the dimensions of being that we refuse to name. In this way, the image acts as a psychological instrument. When the viewer notices the sixth figure, something stirs within, a mixture of curiosity, unease, and recognition. It is not the photograph itself that is haunted, but the observer. The disturbance is internal, arising from the clash between what we expect to see and what appears before us. The mind, confronted with this anomaly, begins to reveal its own depths. It projects meanings, invents explanations, feels emotions that seem disproportionate to the image itself. This reaction exposes how thin the veil between perception and imagination truly is. The unseen becomes a surface onto which the psyche casts its own shadow, turning the act of looking into an act of self-revelation. There is a paradox in our relationship with the unseen. We fear it, yet we are drawn to it. The sixth figure unsettles precisely because it resembles a truth we have long intuited, that there are layers of experience beneath our awareness, forces that shape our lives without our consent. The human being lives at the border between visibility and invisibility, between the known and the unknowable. Every dream, every fleeting intuition, every déjà vu experience is a reminder of this borderland. The photograph, in its eerie stillness, captures that threshold perfectly. It holds the visible world in perfect clarity while allowing something beyond it to slip through. The result is an image that feels both familiar and alien, a mirror of the psyche's dual nature, rational on the surface, mysterious beneath. When the mind confronts something that defies rational explanation, it instinctively turns inward. The question shifts from what is that to why do I see it? The sixth figure, therefore, functions as a kind of psychic catalyst. It forces the observer to examine the contents of their own mind, their beliefs about life and death, about presence and absence, about what it means to be seen or unseen. In doing so, the photograph transforms from an object of external observation into an inward experience. The unseen figure does not simply exist in the photo, it exists in the psychological reaction it provokes. It becomes a mirror held up to the depths of human consciousness, reflecting not a ghostly entity, but the mind's endless capacity for projection and mystery. In many ways, the unseen figure represents the part of ourselves that remains unnamed. Every person carries within them stories that were never told, emotions that were never expressed, aspects of identity that were never allowed to exist. These unexpressed elements live on in the unconscious, influencing behavior, perception, and even the way we interpret art and images. The sixth figure, appearing unexpectedly, awakens this reservoir. Its faintness mirrors the way these hidden parts of the self move, not directly visible, but always present. When we gaze upon that faint silhouette, it is as if we are catching a glimpse of our own forgotten self, preserved in the photograph's silence. The image thus becomes not merely a visual experience, but an initiation into psychological awareness. It teaches that the unseen is not the opposite of the seen, but its complement. Without shadow, light has no meaning. Without mystery, knowledge loses its depth. The sixth figure is the shadow that gives the family's visible unity its hidden dimension. It is what completes the image, even as it disturbs it. Its presence suggests that no human life, no family, no generation exists without its invisible counterpart. The emotional residues, the untold stories, the unseen bonds that connect the living and the dead. Every viewer who looks at the photo becomes part of this dialogue. The mind projects onto the image what it secretly carries. Some will see the sixth figure as a ghost, others as a photographic error, others as a symbol of grief. Each interpretation reveals more about the observer than the observed. The unseen in the image is not a fixed entity, but a mirror that changes shape according to who stands before it. This is why the photograph continues to fascinate long after its subjects have turned to dust. It holds not only the mystery of a family long gone, but the eternal mystery of human perception, that what we see is inseparable from who we are. There is also a tenderness hidden within this terror of the unseen. To recognize that the image reflects the psyche is to recognize that nothing in life is truly lost. The unseen figure suggests continuity, connection, the persistence of presence beyond visibility. It invites the mind to consider that what is invisible is not necessarily absent, but existing in another form, within memory, within emotion, within the quiet recesses of being. The unseen in this sense is not something to be banished, but something to be understood. It is the part of reality that resists confinement to the limits of the eye, and instead belongs to the deeper vision of the soul. The 1891 photograph, then, is not merely an old image. It is a mirror of human consciousness itself. The family stands as the image of the known world, and the sixth figure as the whisper of the unknown. The two coexist in fragile balance, as they do within each of us. The unseen reveals not only the limits of sight, but the vastness of inner perception. It reminds us that every image, every experience, every memory we hold carries both what is shown and what is hidden, and that to understand one, we must learn to sense the other. The photograph becomes a symbol of this eternal dialogue, where the surface and the depth, the visible and the invisible, forever reflect one another in the still light of awareness. The 1891 family photograph stands not only as a visual document, but as a vessel of collective memory. It holds within its faded frame more than just a single household. It contains generations of emotion, silence, and continuity. Every figure in the image carries the weight of ancestry, a living thread that ties the present moment to the invisible past. The photograph's stillness, its sepia tones, and formal posture are deceptive. Beneath them lies the pulse of countless lives that came before. The sixth figure that appears faintly at the edge of the frame or in the blur of shadow is not merely an anomaly, but a symbolic manifestation of this ancestral presence. the quiet reminder that the living are never truly alone in their image. The concept of ancestry is far deeper than genealogy. It is not merely the tracing of blood, but the continuity of experience. Each generation inherits more than physical traits. It inherits patterns of emotion, values, fears, and unresolved desires. The photograph, in this sense, becomes a symbolic stage where the drama of inheritance is silently enacted. The father's posture may mirror that of his own father, his gaze carrying the same sternness or quiet dignity that once shaped him. The mother's expression may hold the tenderness of her lineage, or the quiet restraint taught to her by generations of women who learned to endure more than they could ever speak. Even the children, barely conscious of their role, stand as the living projection of ancestral dreams and burdens. The unseen presence in the photograph can be understood as the return of what the family, and by extension, humanity, has forgotten. Every lineage has its silences, the stories that were never told, the names that faded from record, the emotions that were suppressed to preserve order. These omissions do not disappear. They transform into a kind of psychic residue that lingers in the background of consciousness. The sixth figure, standing or hovering near the family, represents this residue given form. It is as though the photograph has captured not only the physical subjects, but also the emotional atmosphere of their history. The unseen presence may carry the energy of a lost ancestor, one whose memory has been denied, or it may symbolize the accumulated sorrow and longing of the lineage itself, the pain that was never fully expressed. This idea of ancestral presence has deep roots in human psychology and culture. Throughout history, every civilization has maintained rituals to honor its dead, not only as a gesture of remembrance, but as a way of maintaining balance between the visible and invisible worlds. The living understood that to neglect the dead was to invite disturbance, not as punishment, but as the natural consequence of severing the chain of continuity. In the photograph, the sixth figure may be understood as the embodiment of this forgotten ritual, the ancestral voice stepping forward to remind the living that memory must be tended, that the line between generations must remain open. Its appearance signals that the family's silence has reached its limit, that something buried too long demands to be seen. The uncanny feeling the viewer experiences while looking at the photo may stem from a recognition of this same truth within themselves. Each of us carries an inner photograph, a gallery of inherited impressions that we may not consciously remember, but that shape our emotions and choices. The unexplainable fear of water, the instinctive attachment to certain places, the recurring dream of a figure one has never met. All of these may be expressions of ancestral memory surfacing through the psyche. The sixth figure functions as a visual metaphor for this phenomenon. It is the part of the family soul that has been transmitted but not consciously acknowledged, the invisible history that continues to live within each descendant. When we look upon that faint presence, we are not simply witnessing an external ghost, but recognizing the ghost within ourselves, the shared human experience of carrying the past in our bones. The photograph also reveals the paradox of remembrance and forgetting. The family's purpose in taking the portrait was to preserve their image against the erosion of time, yet the passage of time has altered that intention. What was meant to immortalize the living has instead given immortality to the unseen. The sixth figure, though unintended, has become the most compelling element of the photograph. This mirrors the way history often works. The stories that were never meant to survive are the ones that refuse to fade, while the carefully curated narratives of respectability crumble with time. The unseen ancestor, the forgotten tragedy, the buried emotion, these become the enduring presence in the collective psyche, haunting not to terrify but to remind. The photograph, in its accidental honesty, captures this inversion. What is meant to be remembered fades, and what is meant to be forgotten persists. There is an intimacy between the living and the dead that modern eyes often fail to see. In the late 19th century, photography itself was intertwined with death. The camera was a new kind of mirror, one that could preserve the image of the departed, one that could capture the transition between presence and absence. Families often posed with deceased relatives as though they were still among them. their stillness indistinguishable from the living's enforced composure. The sixth figure may therefore also symbolize this older understanding of continuity, that death was not an end but a transformation, that the boundary between the living and the dead was porous. The photograph becomes a spiritual object, a physical space where both realms meet. In a deeper sense, the photograph becomes a meditation on time itself. Each face within it once carried breath and warmth, yet now only their image remains. The sixth figure stands as the embodiment of time's silent return, the trace of continuity that endures even as the visible world decays. It speaks to the persistence of being, the echo that lingers when the voice has long vanished. The photograph, frozen in its 1891 stillness, is not truly still at all. It vibrates with unseen movement, with the endless dialogue between what was and what remains. The sixth figure, whether an accident of light or an imprint of presence, becomes the image of memory itself, fragile, partial, yet unerasable. To look at this photograph is to participate in a ritual of recognition. The observer is drawn into the same chain of continuity, standing as the latest witness in a long lineage of seeing. The sixth figure is no longer confined to the family it once haunted. It has become the mirror for all who gaze upon it. Each viewer brings their own ancestry into the encounter, their own invisible inheritance of joy and sorrow. The photograph thus expands beyond its frame, becoming a collective symbol of humanity's shared memory. It whispers that the past is not gone but present in every heartbeat, that the unseen presences in our lives are not strangers but fragments of ourselves, stretched across time. The 1891 family photograph, then, is less a static relic than a living image of continuity. It reveals that every moment, however ordinary, is saturated with unseen presences, the ancestors, the emotions, the histories that continue to shape us. The sixth figure is not an intruder, but a reminder, the invisible witness who ensures that the chain of memory remains unbroken. The haunting quality of the photograph arises from this realization, that the living and the dead are not separate, that every image carries within it the weight of all that came before, and that what is unseen in the picture is what keeps the visible world alive. It is not a ghost of fear, but of remembrance, a quiet sign that time itself is watching through the frame, waiting to be acknowledged by those who dare to look deeply enough to see it. The presence of the hidden observer within the 1891 family photograph evokes a profound psychological and symbolic tension. The photograph, in its quiet domestic simplicity, seems at first to depict the expected tableau of a family, ordered, composed, certain of its own identity. Yet there exists within its frame an ambiguity, an almost imperceptible figure or gaze that seems to exist beyond the arrangement of the living. This is the hidden observer, the silent witness who occupies the margins of the image yet dominates its emotional space. The hidden observer is not merely an external intruder. It is the embodiment of the unseen forces that accompany human existence: memory, conscience, fate, and the invisible awareness that life is never lived in complete isolation. The family may not notice it, yet its gaze transforms the photograph from a record of life into a revelation of psychological truth. It is not only the family that is being seen, it is also the family that is being watched, judged, or remembered by something greater than itself. The idea of being observed has always carried both comfort and terror. It evokes the primal sensation that one's life is not entirely one's own, that somewhere beyond the immediate field of perception, there exists a presence aware of every thought and gesture. This presence can be divine, ancestral, or psychological, but in every case it represents the awareness that existence is a dialogue rather than a monologue. The hidden observer in the photograph is the image of that awareness, an unseen eye within the frame, reminding the living that they are never the sole authors of their story. The sixth figure that seems to watch from behind or beside the family is the visual manifestation of this truth. Its gaze is the gaze of history, of memory, of the unconscious that knows what the conscious mind denies. It stands as the guardian of what has been silenced, the keeper of truths the visible world cannot hold. The act of looking is never innocent. The family, when posing for the photograph, believed themselves to be the subjects, but in the end, they also become objects of perception. not only for the camera, but for every eye that looks upon them afterward. The photograph thus contains two levels of vision: the deliberate gaze of the camera and the unintended gaze of the unseen. The hidden observer reverses the direction of sight. Instead of the viewer looking into the image looks back. The faint figure, the inexplicable blur, the suggestion of another watcher, all of these give the impression that the photograph is conscious of being seen. It becomes an artifact that sees its observer, a mirror that looks both ways. This duality is what gives it its haunting power. It suggests that the act of observation itself binds the visible and invisible worlds, that to see is always to be seen in return. The hidden observer may also represent the moral or emotional residue of the family's life. Within every household, there are unspoken dynamics, secret shames, and silent observers, those who watch without being seen, who know more than they are permitted to say. The photograph, in capturing stillness, inadvertently captures this psychic structure. The sixth figure, faint and indistinct, can be seen as the invisible member of the family, the embodiment of everything unacknowledged within them. It might represent a silenced truth, a repressed memory, a guilt passed down through generations. In this sense, the hidden observer is not an external ghost, but the internal witness that resides within every human soul. It is that part of us which records all that happens, even what we consciously forget. The camera, with its cold mechanical eye, becomes a symbolic extension of that inner witness. It sees impartially, capturing not only what we wish to show, but what we wish to hide. There is a peculiar intimacy in this awareness. The hidden observer, though distant, is connected to the family through empathy rather than intrusion. It does not disrupt the scene, it completes it. Its invisibility does not diminish its presence. Rather, it amplifies the mystery of human consciousness itself, that something unseen can exert such influence over the visible. Every photograph, whether we admit it or not, carries the presence of this observer. It is the quiet suggestion that no image, no life, exists without being part of a larger field of awareness. The 1891 photograph crystallizes this truth. The sixth figure's indistinct outline transforms the familiar into the metaphysical, inviting the viewer to sense the invisible dimensions that accompany every human story. The family's serenity becomes charged with another kind of energy, as though time itself were observing them. The idea of the hidden observer also challenges the illusion of separation between subject and object. In our daily lives, we imagine ourselves as distinct individuals moving through an objective world. Yet the photograph reminds us that perception is never so simple. The act of seeing creates a relationship. It binds the observer and the observed in mutual reflection. The hidden figure, therefore, is not apart from the family, but an expression of their own inner life projected outward. It is the manifestation of the self's awareness of itself. The moment when consciousness glimpses its own depths. The uncanny sensation produced by the sixth figure arises from this recognition that what we perceive as external mystery is, in fact, an image of our internal complexity. This hidden gaze also introduces the concept of accountability. The awareness of being watched, even by an unseen presence, has the power to awaken conscience. It reminds the living that their actions, their emotions, their secrets are not lost in the void, but remain part of a larger order of memory and truth. In this way, the hidden observer serves as both witness and moral center. It is the invisible record keeper of existence, ensuring that nothing truly disappears. The faint shadow within the photograph becomes the symbolic eye of remembrance, observing quietly, patiently, without judgment, but without forgetting. This is why the image feels alive, even after more than a century. The unseen observer within it still watches, and in doing so, compels the viewer to confront their own visibility before time and eternity. The still photograph thus becomes an eternal act of seeing. The family is frozen, but the unseen gaze continues. The sixth figure is not limited by the constraints of the image. It exists as the symbol of perpetual awareness. When modern eyes look upon that old photograph, they enter into the same loop of vision. They observe, and they too are observed. The hidden observer now extends beyond the frame, inhabiting the space between the image and the mind that contemplates it. It is this endless circulation of awareness that gives the photograph its haunting vitality. The hidden observer, whether ghost, memory, or consciousness itself, ensures that the image never truly sleeps. It watches through time, reminding every viewer that even the most ordinary moment is never without its witness, that every life, however private, is seen in ways it cannot comprehend, and that the invisible gaze is the thread that binds all existence together across the fragile boundary between the seen and the unseen. The boundary between reality and perception within the 1891 family photograph is an unstable and trembling line, one that dissolves the moment the viewer begins to question what they are truly seeing. On the surface, the image appears fixed and factual, a record of a family, a moment, an arrangement of bodies and faces captured by light. Yet beneath that apparent certainty lies something far more elusive, the awareness that every act of seeing is filtered through the observer's own unconscious projections, fears, and desires. The photograph, in this sense, does not simply show what was there. It becomes a mirror that reflects what we bring to it. The moment one notices the mysterious sixth figure in the frame, the entire logic of the image changes. The ordinary becomes uncanny. The safe boundaries between life and death, presence and absence, perception and imagination begin to blur. What once seemed like an objective record transforms into a psychological event, a confrontation between the visible and the invisible aspects of the human mind. Reality, as it appears in such a photograph, is always a construction, a synthesis of what the eye perceives and what the psyche interprets. The camera captures light, but the mind interprets meaning. When we gaze at an old image, we project our own expectations onto it. We want it to tell us a story, to confirm our sense of order. Yet the inclusion of an ambiguous, inexplicable element, a shadow, a figure, an outline that shouldn't exist, exposes the fragility of that order. It reveals that perception is not passive, it is creative, and sometimes deceptive. The mind seeks to explain what it cannot understand, to rationalize the irrational. But the sixth figure in the photograph resists such simplification. It stands as a quiet defiance against the human desire to categorize experience neatly. It whispers that the world is not confined to the limits of perception, that reality may extend beyond the reach of our senses, and that truth is not always visible to the eye. In this interplay between what is seen and what is intuited, the photograph becomes an allegory of human consciousness itself. Just as the image contains both the visible family and the invisible observer, the psyche contains both the conscious ego and the vast, unseen regions of the unconscious. The photograph thus becomes a psychological landscape rather than a historical artifact. The visible family corresponds to the ego, the self that wishes to appear composed, civilized, and in control, while the faint, half-perceived figure represents the unconscious, the part of the self that lurks beneath awareness. When the two coexist within the same frame, the result is not harmony, but tension. The unconscious intrudes upon the visible world, distorting the viewer's perception and forcing them to question the stability of what they thought they knew. It is a confrontation between the outer reality of appearances and the inner reality of symbols and shadows. Every photograph, in essence, is a negotiation between light and darkness, and this negotiation mirrors the human condition. Light reveals, darkness conceals, yet both are necessary for the image to exist. The mysterious figure, barely illuminated, almost swallowed by shadow, occupies the threshold between those two realms. It is neither fully real nor fully imagined. It exists in the liminal space between. The sixth figure emerges from that liminal space, reminding the viewer that what we call reality is only a small portion of what truly exists. The mind perceives not the world as it is, but the world as it is capable of comprehending. And in that gap between what is and what can be seen lies the mystery that gives the photograph its power. To question reality is to risk confronting the instability of one's own mind. The viewer who looks too long into the photograph begins to sense a strange reversal. Perhaps it is not the image that is haunted, but the observer. The more one stares, the more the boundaries dissolve. Time begins to blur. The 1891 moment feels oddly alive, as though the figures might still breathe somewhere beyond the paper's surface. The family members seem to sense something unseen, as if their stillness were a defense against an invisible presence surrounding them. The sixth figure becomes a portal through which the past gazes back at the present, collapsing the linear distance between then and now. This is not mere imagination. It is a psychological truth. The mind, when confronted with ambiguity, instinctively fills the void with meaning. We project consciousness onto the unseen and animate the inanimate. The sixth figure may be nothing more than an optical accident, but our perception transforms it into a living mystery, a symbol of the threshold between the seen and the unseen dimensions of existence. This boundary is also the site of transformation. It is where the rational mind, accustomed to order and certainty, encounters the irrational and must expand to include it. When the viewer recognizes that what they see in the photograph may not correspond to physical reality, they enter into a deeper mode of seeing, one that involves intuition rather than logic. At this boundary, reality and perception merge into a single fluid continuum. The photograph no longer functions as a fixed representation, but as an evolving relationship between the image and the observer. Each person who gazes upon it brings their own inner world into contact with its mystery. For one, the figure may be a ghost. For another, a trick of light. For yet another, a metaphor for the unseen dimensions of the psyche. None of these perceptions are wrong, for they all reveal aspects of the same truth, that reality is not singular but manifold, that perception creates as much as it receives. The photograph's power lies precisely in this ambiguity. It allows reality and imagination to coexist without boundary, each feeding into the other. Thus, the 1891 family photograph becomes more than an artifact of its time. It becomes a mirror of the human condition, a reflection of how we live poised between the known and the unknowable, the visible and the hidden, the conscious and the unconscious. The sixth figure, faint and inexplicable, stands as the emblem of that fragile boundary. It reminds us that reality is never simply what we see, but also what we sense, what we fear, and what we cannot name. The act of seeing, once believed to be simple, becomes a profound mystery. The photograph teaches that perception is not the opposite of illusion, but its companion, that what we call real is only a shadow of the deeper truth that lies beyond the reach of the eye, yet within the heart's silent awareness, the eternal meeting place of perception and reality, where both dissolve into one. The psychological meaning of the sixth figure in the 1891 family photograph lies not in what it visibly represents, but in what it awakens within the observer. It is an archetype, a symbol that stirs something ancient, something buried in the depths of human consciousness. The faint, indistinct figure in the background is not merely a spectral presence. It is a mirror held up to the human psyche, reflecting the shadowed regions that exist within every soul. In its vagueness and ambiguity, it evokes the same unease one feels when confronted by their own unconscious, that part of the self which carries everything the conscious mind refuses to see. The photograph becomes an encounter not only with the unknown in the world, but with the unknown in oneself. It reveals that the sixth figure is not an intruder from outside reality, but a manifestation of the collective human interior, the silent witness of all that has been denied, forgotten, or suppressed. In every human life, there exists a dialogue between light and darkness, between what is known and what is hidden. The sixth figure embodies the hidden aspect, the one that cannot be named yet exerts influence over all that is visible. The family in the photograph, frozen in their moment of domestic calm, represents the conscious self, ordered, composed, believing itself whole. But the appearance of the faint, inexplicable figure in the background reveals that wholeness to be an illusion. It exposes the incompleteness that exists within every human being. The photograph becomes a symbolic enactment of the psyche's internal structure, the family as the ego, striving for harmony, and the sixth figure as the shadow, the unseen counterpart, containing everything that the visible self has rejected. This is not a figure of evil or fear alone. It is the necessary counterpart to light. It is the reservoir of instincts, forgotten emotions, ancestral memories, and unacknowledged truths that sustain the balance of the human soul. To deny it is to fracture the psyche, to live in partial awareness. The psychological power of the sixth figure lies in its ability to evoke this tension without resolution. It does not demand explanation, it demands recognition. The mind instinctively seeks to rationalize what it sees, to identify the shape, to decide whether it is a trick of exposure, a ghostly form, or an accident of light. But such efforts miss the point. The true meaning of the figure lies not in what it is, but in what it represents to the psyche. It is the embodiment of the unknown, the part of existence that defies classification. In this sense, the sixth figure becomes an image of the human relationship with mystery itself. It reminds us that consciousness is limited, that our understanding of reality is filtered through perception, and that beyond those limits lies a realm the mind cannot grasp, yet cannot escape. This confrontation is both terrifying and sacred. It reawakens the ancient intuition that life is surrounded by forces that cannot be contained by reason, that the unseen continues to shape the seen. The sixth figure, therefore, serves as a psychological mirror that reflects the viewer's own inner landscape. What one perceives in it depends on what one carries within. For some, it may evoke fear, the fear of the unknown, the anxiety of mortality, the suspicion that there are presences beyond human control. For others, it may awaken a sense of reverence, the feeling that something transcendent observes and connects all things. Both reactions are valid, for they emerge from the same psychic source, the confrontation with what lies beyond the ego. The photograph's ambiguity allows this projection to occur naturally. Its lack of clarity is its power, for it invites the unconscious to fill in the void. The sixth figure thus becomes not one thing but many. A ghost, an ancestor, a memory, a symbol of fate, or the image of the hidden self. It exists in the liminal space between the photograph and the psyche, where image and imagination merge. There's a profound psychological truth in the idea that what is repressed eventually finds its way back into visibility. The sixth figure may be understood as the return of the repressed, the emergence of what has been buried beneath generations of silence. In every family, there are untold stories, unspoken griefs, and emotional inheritances that shape the lives of the living. The photograph, as a record of lineage, unintentionally becomes the stage upon which these hidden histories reappear. The sixth figure is the symbol of that haunting continuity, the ancestral memory that watches quietly from the shadows. It is not a stranger, but part of the same bloodline, part of the same psychic fabric that binds the family together. The psychological unease it creates arises from the recognition that the past is never truly past. The unconscious carries it forward, preserving it beneath the surface of awareness, waiting for the right image, the right moment, to reveal itself once again. The sixth figure also embodies the paradox of human consciousness, the longing to see what lies beyond, and the fear of what that sight might bring. It represents the threshold between knowledge and mystery, life and death, ego and soul. To encounter it is to face the awareness that one is being watched, not merely by another, but by one's own deeper self. This is why the photograph feels alive, why the gaze of the unseen figure feels directed outward, beyond the boundaries of the frame. It is the eye of the unconscious turned toward consciousness, reminding it of its incompleteness. Such an encounter is both unsettling and transformative. It can awaken awe, humility, and the sense of belonging to something greater than the visible world. It reveals that the psyche itself is not confined within the individual, but participates in a vast network of shared symbols and collective memories, what some might call the eternal memory of humanity. In this way, the sixth figure serves as a symbolic teacher, silently pointing toward integration. It calls the observer to acknowledge the unseen within themselves, the shadow, the memory, the part of the self that watches and remembers even when the conscious mind turns away. Only through recognition can wholeness be achieved. The photograph thus becomes an initiation into deeper awareness. The family, with their fixed expressions, embody the outer life. The sixth figure, with its formless presence, embodies the inner life that must eventually be faced. Together, they form a complete image of the human condition, the visible and the invisible, the conscious and the unconscious, forever intertwined. The psychological meaning of the sixth figure, therefore, is not confined to the photograph's mystery, but extends into the nature of being itself. It symbolizes the unseen continuity that links all moments, all generations, all aspects of self. It whispers that every human life is shadowed by something greater, that what we fear in the darkness is often the reflection of our own depth. The sixth figure does not threaten, it reveals. It invites the observer to look not outward, but inward, to see that the mystery in the photograph is the same mystery that lives within the human heart, the silent witness that endures beyond time, beyond image, beyond the fragile boundary of the visible world.